Well, welcome, Scott, to the Leaders Who Care series. It's great to see you.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to this one because what you do touches my heart, really. I think how important it is, and it's a continuum basically that has to keep going. So let's start by, if you would, I have to tell guys this, especially briefly introduce yourself. Not about business or what you do, whatnot, but who Scott is, where you're from originally, where you are now, family, maybe something you've never told anybody ever, and you want to reveal it to the world now. Who knows? But a little bit about you.
Good. Well, my name is Scott Weber. I'm American and French. I grew up in the US, but with an American dad and a French mother. Did all my schooling in French at the Lycée Français de New York before heading to university at Georgetown, and then moving out to Europe to start my career at the UN. And I've lived out here ever since. So American culturally, bicultural, French American, and raised our kids out here. I married my high school sweetheart. So we've been together since we were 17.
Wow.
That's a huge part of who I am. And we got started in life early on many fronts, including with kids. So we have a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old. And one's finished college already. The other one's a rising sophomore at Boston University. So it's been a charmed life, I must say. I'm just so grateful every day, and I feel it, and I'm very conscious about that, about how fortunate I've been on the fundamentals.
Yeah. How many years do you said married?
Well, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary of marriage, but we've been together much longer than that.
That's a testimonial for peace right there.
Every day. You have to build peace every day. Can't take it for granted.
Don't. So you mentioned your kids. What were you like as a kid and a teenager? Were you like organizing teams during recess at school to be able to collaborate? Were you playing sports, music? What did you do?
I think peace building came a bit later in life. No, so I was a very curious kid. I would devour magazines like Scientific American and Omni. Doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. Omni magazine, scientific magazines like that. I was very curious, tinkering with things. I was a huge player of Lego when I was little, building entire worlds and stuff. So that's the kind of kid I was. But I was very sporty. I played baseball, not particularly well. I was a good swimmer, very good swimmer. I was on the swim team. That was a big part of my life growing up. But I think sports played a very important role for another reason, which was that because I was a culturally American kid going to a French school my whole youth, I kind of struggled through those years. And my outlet to gain confidence and self-confidence was through sports. So probably the teacher that had the biggest influence on me was my gym teacher, who constantly recognized the skills I brought and would always have me do the demonstration in class, be it in judo or running or this or that. So I actually gained a lot of self-confidence through that, even if I was, having a tougher time in the academics of a French system. It's not a French language school in the United States. It's actually the French national system, just transposed in the US. It was very tough. It's a huge blessing, and I thank my mom in particular hugely, but my parents for putting us with great difficulty and great cost through a French system, because the richness of being bicultural in addition to being bilingual is incredibly important, incredibly important. And it's been a massive part of my life. So I'm thankful for it, even if it was challenging. But sports played that role in my life at the time. And because I was so curious and kind of trying to devour data and information like that, I would even memorize the almanac. Almanac was one of my favorite books as a kid. And to such a degree that my parents used to call me facto man, because I would always be sprouting facts from the almanac and wanting to learn.
You should have been the founder of Wikipedia.
I know the founder of Wikipedia. He's a great guy. He had the idea
Um,
first.
it's interesting you're touching on some other questions we're going to get to later, but when I speak to and interview a lot of people for this or for talent and opportunities, men especially go back to even a moment sometimes in their life where the coach did this or that for them or put them out at the right moment or just believed in them as the foundation for who they are and how confident they are. So it's quite something. And another reason why we actually call this leaders who care, because
Mm.
we're always affecting or impacting people, even when we don't know it in that sense. So I'm glad you shared that.
What
You
was what was very interesting, Mark, just sorry to interrupt, what was very
yeah.
interesting is that years later, um, separately, my older brother and I got wind that this particular gym teacher, Monsieur Taroha was his name, had a personal tragedy.
Mm.
And we both reached out to him separately. And we both wrote to him. We discovered this by comparing notes later. We both discovered that he was the guy who had the greatest influence on us growing up at school.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So in fact, when you ask people, and I often ask people this, is like, which teacher had the greatest influence on you? And it's almost never about the subject matter of what they taught.
No.
It's about the fact that they actually saw something in you and helped to bring the best out of you. That's what the beauty and the importance of the role of a teacher is in any young person's life. It's not just knowledge; it's really them seeing you as an individual, and that was definitely my experience.
100%. And not to be cute, but they are leaders who care and care about you, and which is how I came up in calling this series that and talking to people, because I had leaders who cared along the way too, and sports was a
Yeah,
big part of it, a big part of it. We all need somebody to believe in us. Period. And it's something that we should be thinking about when we're, as I said, impacting other people. We'll get to influencers in a minute, even more. Your journey started with some school named Georgetown, out there, and you were in international relations, economics, and even Russian. What were you envisioning at the time, and did that specifically lead you to the significant work you did at the UN and in the world of peace building, or how did that evolve?
right. So my world was rocked by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Those were things that really got me. My curiosity just shot through the roof because I had just started, I thought at the time, to understand how the world was structured,
Hmm.
and then it all changed in one go. And so I knew I wanted to study international relations, but the interest in the Russian language, in Russian history, in post-Soviet political affairs came from that realization that Americans didn't really understand that part of the world. And whenever I would try to understand, ask questions, etc., I wasn't able to really get that depth of understanding. And I realized if you don't learn a language as well, it's very hard to understand the mindset that
Right.
people have. So I started taking intensive Russian. I did a general curriculum in international relations, but with a specific kind of specialization in post-Soviet affairs. And that led me into my first jobs in the UN, working in humanitarian affairs and disaster prevention in the former Soviet countries, which was, the best possible school as well. Right out of college, in fact, 21, 22, I was out in the former Soviet countries representing the UN and visiting all the CIS countries, the 12 CIS countries of the
Hmm.
former Soviet space, also in Eastern Europe. And so that was in humanitarian affairs. And I then shifted into political affairs in the UN, working as an assistant to the head of the UN in Geneva, who happened to be Russian as well. So that was amazing. Former deputy foreign minister of the Soviet Union uh, uh, before the collapse. And then from there, I shifted into peace building because I recognized my career was on a bit of a fast trajectory at the time, and I could see where I was going inside the UN, and I didn't want that. It was not where I saw myself, because I was writing memos and policy documents on things that I didn't have a firsthand knowledge about. I didn't have legitimacy to really be influencing things, even in a small way, on those topics. And so I identified the part of the UN that was breaking all the rules, that was doing things in a much more values-driven way, that put the role of people at the local level in the driving seat of the change in their own lives. And that spoke to me. That absolutely spoke to me. So I convinced the head of that unit, because it was an experimental part of the UN, to hire me. And he did. And one of my first assignments was to help the Rwandan government as it was establishing its Reconciliation Commission at the time and going through some massive reforms. They were initiating a decentralization of the government. They were doing the National Unity and Reconciliation Commission. They were planning to rewrite the constitution. They had all sorts of big things, and it was hard to coordinate because they had so many priorities at once. And I was there to begin to help in all those efforts. And then I started working on the Middle East within this organization, on Central America, on Somalia and other places. And later, in 2005, I was tapped to take over the agency at a very young age, at 29, almost before I turned 30. And I became everyone's boss overnight, which was a really difficult leadership journey. I was the youngest guy in the organization. I became everyone's boss. And it was a profoundly exciting time. I wanted that challenge, but at the same time, I was full of doubts because I didn't have the experience of. I was taking over from one of my mentors, who was closing on at 60 at the time, I think. And here I was, and and I stayed in that role for 18 years. So I was 18 years the head of the International Organization for Peace Building, Interpeace, with teams all over the world. It was a profoundly inspiring experience.
I bet.
I mean, I wouldn't trade that.
Just to interrupt for a second, we focus a lot on experiences and accomplishments rather than years of experience. So even though you were at 29, you said you had a lot of experiences already.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I started earlier than many, but it was especially important that I was able to lean on much more experienced people as well, you know. And I had one of the big values that I've always found to be fundamental, no matter how profoundly successful you are in whatever field you're in, is, are people humble? Or do they have a level of humility? And there's no contradiction between ambition and humility.
No.
It shouldn't be, really. People misunderstand it as being meek. It's not.
Yep.
It's just a level of actually self-confidence that you don't have all the answers. But if you start asking the right questions, you can get things done. And if you know how to work with others and bring out the best in others, you can change the world.
Absolutely.
And so one of the things I was inspired by was precisely leaders around me who they were profoundly brilliant, profoundly successful, but deeply humble at the same time. And that I loved. So I really wanted to emulate that. And that's, if I've had any success in my leadership journey, I think it was because of that combination of being very ambitious in terms of the change. I personally think that this is how I try to live my life, is that we're on this planet a very short amount of time, and we have to do as much as we can to make the world a better place for others while we're here. And that's the drive of ambition. I'm super impatient in that sense, but I'm humble in recognizing I don't have the answers, but I'm going to make sure I try to ask the right question.
Well, I interviewed a CEO over a year now, and being humble absolutely doesn't mean you're meek or weak or anything like that. And he said he's having the best time being a CEO because now he can be emotional, now he can be vulnerable, and he doesn't have to pretend to know everything anymore. And the burden was lifted, and he trusted people. And he said, what I found was that the cream came to the top when I trusted them that they could do it. In other words, going back to your other point, he believed in people and trusted them that they could do things.
Right. And to go along with that, my approach was always to see my role as a CEO as removing the obstacles in the way of other people so that they could perform as best they could.
Yeah, Pat, you like basketball. Pat Riley said, I'm sure he wasn't the only one, that his biggest legacy, aside from family, is seeing all his assistant and associate coaches become head coaches somewhere else.
There you go.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Along those lines, we founded Fifth Element based on the premise basically that leaders and their organizations can do way better when they're doing good at the same time. You clearly are an early leader in that premise. You've seen it, especially understanding the intersection or interconnection, if you will, of finance and economic benefits, where social and or environmental impact can also happen and needs the economic impact to happen to be sustainable. Money's not a bad thing. Money's needed to sustain social and environmental impact. Can you describe some of the experiences, what you learned about the importance of economic development and financing, and how it gives you yourself a unique vantage point for your current role as CEO of Peaceinvest, if you will, and making an impact achieving peace?
Sure, sure. So, well, look, throughout my career working in primarily post-conflict countries, one of the things that I saw was that, and people say this all the time, is we can't eat dialogue, right? Is that yes, okay, we can kind of listen to one another, we can understand one another, we can start to trust one another, but if we don't see our economic situation improve, or if it
Yeah.
improves in ways that are unequal, that's going to shatter the fragile peace and trust
Right.
that we have. And if I had to say that if there was a red thread throughout all my experiences, and that's I'm talking about from Somalia to working with the youth gangs, the most violent youth gangs in the world in Central America, all the way into Asia and Aceh, where I worked on the peace process there. If there was a red thread throughout it all, it was inequality and exclusion. They were at the core of all conflicts that I've dealt with in my career. And the manifestation of that injustice through violence and through usurping basically people's frustrations and manipulating it. So when you think about it, one of the best ways to build peace is actually to create a more equal economy.
Yep.
We had learned a lot in peace building about how to build legitimate institutions, especially bottom up, because when everything else is broken, people go back to what's most core, which is the local, the tribal, etc. You have to rebuild often from below to build
Right.
layers of trust in governance. So we learned how to do that. We know what that takes. We learned even more about what it takes to reconcile people who have been either killing each other, that's the extreme situation, but in a polarized society like we have in the United States or in Europe right now too.
Yep.
How to rebuild those levels of trust. We know how to do that. The part that always eluded us throughout all those years was how to create an economy that binds. How do you create an economy that doesn't tear people apart and reinforce division? And investments, when I looked at how people invest, how companies invest, they tend to extract value from society rather than build it. And even when they go into risky situations, what do? They buy insurance for themselves, the investors do. They don't try to actually reduce the risks at source for the communities themselves. And what I realized is that a lot of these contexts in which I was working are essentially high growth markets. The context in Africa that I'm working in, the population growth, these are massive markets to be seized and to be helped. And yet people don't come because of the perceived risks, sometimes real risks, but very often the perceived risks, force the capital to be priced too high, and there's in a prohibitive sense. And so capital doesn't flow. And when you realize that a lot of that is essentially bias, it's like the president of the African Development Bank, who said recently that they are a AAA rated bank and they guarantee a lot of investments, but they almost never pay them out, those guarantees, because Africa is the second region of the world with the fewest defaults. He says, what are we de-risking? We're actually de-risking bias. And so I recognize that
Interesting.
we have to break down these barriers to investment flowing to high growth opportunities that can make it be transformative in terms of global stability by actually reducing those risks and bringing more evidence to how we understand risk in these contexts. And that's one of the things that we do at Peaceinvest is that we don't just identify investment opportunities that have the potential to bind communities together and lift all the boats, but that are commercial in nature. We actually de-risk those investments so you render them more profitable at the same time by
Right.
de-risking them at source. Because a lot of the impact investment community thinks that you have to take a cut in your returns to have an impact.
Right.
I would say it's the opposite.
Right.
Is that, in fact, if you do your investment, if you design, you bake into the investment the de-risking methodologies that I did for 23 years in peace building, you actually render your project, your investment more profitable, more secure. You secure cash flows. You lower the probability of default and the loss given default, and thus you improve the rating of your investment and its profitability. So it's actually the opposite from how it's being framed often. And I think that's what's exciting is that when companies and investors start to realize they can make more money by doing things in a better way, my goodness, we're going to change the world.
Yeah, I agree. It's why I don't call nonprofits anymore. I call them social profits because I never liked when I joined as an employee, JC's International as a nonprofit. I told them I don't like starting with non. In fact, the
Yeah,
only non I have in my life is non-flict, which we're going to do. But and you'll get more investment. And to your point, well, I'll go back 2 steps a little bit. You know, the fourth industrial revolution is about technology effectively and AI,
yeah.
virtual realities, et cetera, and faster moving than ever before. But the fifth is about humanity and how they come together. And
Well said.
you mentioned Africa. Africa does have and will have the most valuable talent by far in the world. And if
Absolutely.
you want to talk supporting that economic development, talk about, if you will, de-risking skill that teach and educate on skills, that talent. It's incredible investment.
Absolutely. I mean, that's where the opportunity is going to be. I mean, we are facing major crises in food security, for example, and yet
Mhm.
Africa has 60% of the unused arable land in
Right.
the world is in Africa. 1 in 4 people are going to be African in the next 25 years. So this is where it's at. And this is where the exciting growth is happening. This is where the innovation is happening.
And
I
and
think,
and and I'm going to throw something at you here. The investment of creating, you talked about equity before, creating health equity and creating equal access to education is a tremendous investment to keep that talent healthy, keep that talent, skilled in jobs, which then again makes all the initiatives more profitable, more sustainable as well. And there's nothing wrong with a social profit making money to put back into what they're doing.
on the contrary, that's how you create sustainability.
Right.
Absolutely. So yeah, and that's why one of the focus areas of Peaceinvest, we're working on green energy and mobility, on digital and financial inclusion, on food security and nutrition to
Hmm.
address some of the big bottlenecks in the world right now on these issues. But the fourth is human capital. We've actually created a vehicle, an investment vehicle to invest in people's skills and have that create a return for investors and a massive return for the government and for society.
Yeah.
And investing in people does that. And so, and especially, this is especially important in contexts where you've had traumatic events like past wars or difficult crises. And certainly we lived through different forms of crisis with the global financial crisis and how it affected the developing world, the Ebola crisis, the COVID crisis, not least of which the most recently. But a lot of these countries have growth ambitions like this, but human capital that isn't quite there. And
Right.
we have to close that gap so that they can actually realize their potential.
And
And
you
a
know what's
lot
so
of what,
great about that? I'm sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you. It just
yeah,
came to me because if I don't tell you now, I'll forget it. Um, if you if you take care of those people, and I don't mean through just giving them money or giving them whatever, their dignity goes up, their pride goes up, crime goes down, families improve, the kids see what the parents are doing, and they're into it. I mean, this isn't rocket science.
absolutely. Absolutely. Look, when you break it down, there's no economic development without peace, and there's no peace without economic development, right? And at the core of it all are people, and people's abilities to realize their own development goals and to live together in trusting relationships. At the core of peace is building trust. And that is what all our, that's the ultimate litmus test for everything that we do, be it is as a diplomat, be it as a business person, be it as a teacher, be it as whatever, is are you contributing to people's ability to drive the change in their own lives? And are you reinforcing trust in society? And I mean trust horizontally between people and trust vertically between people and their authorities. That's the ultimate test of this of peace building.
Yeah, I agree. And resolving conflicts is an interesting thing. We work with a lot of companies, family offices, organizations, whatever. And what I've found, um, what I've found is unless there's a process of how to listen to each other, unless there's a process of how to have inclusion, it doesn't seem to work as well. Basically, I've seen so many places say, "We'll work out, we resolve things, we work it out, we sit down, we this and that and the other." And I have a favorite, obviously, Nonflict as a process, as a program where I've had candidates, especially women and minorities, whose voices still aren't heard equally, more than before, but certainly not equally in companies and whatnot. When there's a program, for example, like a Nonflict in place that shows the leaders have a commitment to people's voices being actually heard and getting to best case scenarios where they can do more. If they want to, they can be more engaged in than just their job, but they can get onto big projects. They can fail and come back. They can get recognized for it. It really makes a difference, and it works more when there is a program or a process or a commitment to something rather than we figure it out. And that should, I think, apply to almost anything.
Yeah, and we don't value enough those types of skills in our educational systems.
Right.
And I spoke about that at the beginning of this episode. Is that I was in the French system, kind of jams you full of knowledge rather than teaching you necessarily how to think or how to go out into the world and survive or thrive.
Right.
So that's changed, I think, with time. I think the educational community and leadership around the world, and I used to be a very avid participant in some of the biggest conferences on education because I believe in it so much as kind of the ultimate theory of change for a better world. But what I see is that the biggest challenge in education is the relevance of what's being taught. And what you're talking about in Nonflict is a wonderful methodology. There are many others that hit the same kind of messaging, but we don't value that enough in what we teach young people. And it's especially important, I think, because you then carry some of those skills into adulthood. You might not remember how to do certain calculus equations, but what you may have learned in terms of how to work with others, that you're going to carry on to your whole life and continue to work that muscle. And it's a muscle. And
It is.
the more you practice it, the more you're in proximity with people who demonstrate those skills, the more you become a vector of peace as well in society. And it's a skill set. I've often said that in all the people I've hired and over my years as CEO, the greatest kind of quality in peace building, at least, was emotional intelligence. It wasn't kind of what we call a hard IQ. It was emotional intelligence. That's what made for the best peacemakers. And that's a catchphrase for a lot of things, but it's very much a humility and a cultural awareness, an ability to listen, to use your, we were
Yeah.
given two ears and one mouth, and we should use them in that proportion. It's in things like that, active listening. But then it gets, you can go much deeper into the
Sure.
techniques of this, right? To help your community or your society to thrive and to bring out the best in everybody. But we don't teach that, and I think that's a tragedy. And
Yeah,
uh, and I, I'm a big advocate for that.
Yeah, me too, 100%. We've switched from soft to, I think I told you, high skills, which is human intelligence skills. And executives down to everybody, parents. It is all the things you talked about: humility and active listening, and not having to pretend that you know everything at all, because no one knows everything, not even the president of whatever company or country or
Of
whatnot.
course.
So, in LA, we say leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. We're probably definitely going to have to do a sequel or maybe multiples. But last question on this part is, a client told me back in 2021, he said, Mark, the year 2020, it seemed to fly by slowly. And I thought that was quite interesting. And because a lot of people somehow feel like 2020 was yesterday, and at the same time years ago, that feeling. So with that all said, and we're already well into 2024, what are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
Most grateful for. Wow. My kids. The boy, talk about resilience. I mean,
No kidding.
what they went through with COVID. I mean, we as adults, we had in French we say on a fait nos vies. We've made our lives. We've achieved the things we wanted to achieve. But our kids, especially the ones at the ages that I have, my goodness, I think it was a profound shock to the system, rattled their world, required them to develop skills and awareness that we never had to do. I think, and they've come through it. But I think the hardship of what they had to live through has built their resilience. So I'm massively grateful for just what wonderful human beings they are, and how they've done that. And again, I'm humble about that, because I don't know how I would have handled it.
Yeah,
Had we
they get a lot of information thrown at them while they're, in general.
Yeah, and the uncertainty that, there's a generalized malaise in the world right now. Let's be clear.
Yeah,
Be it politically, as an American, I certainly feel it.
yeah,
Europe is not doing well right now. The war in Ukraine, the war Gaza.
yep.
There are profound reasons to be disturbed at the moment at a fundamental level. And what gives me hope, in a sense, is that, and I've always felt this, and this is certainly a legacy that I get. For another time, I'll tell you the story about my great grandfather and the role he played after the First World War. But for me, this is a time of a lot of creativity and an awareness that our old system no longer works. That I get excited about. I don't like it when I don't quite understand a problem. I need to understand a problem enough. And once I understand it enough, I get excited, because then it lights a fire in me to do something about it and to change it. And I feel right now it's crystal clear the old international governance system is broken. It doesn't work. We need creative alternatives. We need all sorts of other pathways to change. We need different forms of institutions that are less siloed and more
Right.
networked institutions, et cetera. We need a rebalancing of justice in terms of the North and the South of this world, all sorts of issues like that. But I think there's an awareness now the old system doesn't work, and there's a massive level of creativity that is thinking about what new system we need. And I get excited about that. I think that
Well,
is brilliant. We've been hostage to the 1945 international governance system for too long. And now there's an awareness it is broken. Let's figure out the next system.
well, which is something to be hopeful for, because as they say, sometimes you gotta hopefully not hit rock bottom to actually be aware we got to change something, and now hopefully in a lot of those areas you talked about, maybe there can be change. Well, I'm grateful for our new friendship, and I'm grateful for
Hmm,
you know um
likewise.
you being a leader who cares, because we do need a lot more leaders who care, and I'm probably hopeful for the same thing. So thanks for being on this series. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great being here.